Thank you for joining us for this case study on hydrogen fuel cells in port trucking operations. I'm Debbie Petrusik, a Senior Advisor over at Prairie's Economic Development Canada, here located in Edmonton. And I'm pleased to join you today for this presentation by the Port of Los Angeles. Prairie's Can strongly supports hydrogen opportunity in Alberta and across the country, and we're a proud partner in the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub. Just before we begin, the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We encourage everyone watching to reflect on the territory, treaty, and people where we live and work. This webinar is part of Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub's webinar series on building a low-carbon hydrogen economy in the Edmonton region. These monthly conversations are meant to provide industry, government, and investors with the knowledge and tools they need to take advantage of the Edmonton region's potential for low-cost, low-carbon hydrogen and to contribute to the development of this new energy system. You can find past webinars on the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub's website at erh2.ca. And this presentation will also be available on that site tomorrow. For information and updates about future webinars, be sure to join the Hub's mailing list and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. So as mentioned, today's topic is hydrogen fuel cells in port trucking operations. The Port of Los Angeles, in conjunction with Kenworth Truck Company, Toyota, Shell, and others, recently demonstrated a collaborative zero-emission goods movement project focused on the use of hydrogen fuel cells in heavy-duty trucks for port service. The lessons learned from this project show the potential for hydrogen as a zero-emissions fuel platform for heavy-duty goods movement. To discuss those results, we're joined by Jacob Goldberg, an environmental specialist at the Port of Los Angeles Environmental Management Division. As part of the air quality team, Mr. Goldberg is the project manager for the Technology Advancement Program, overseeing the funding of technology demonstrations at projects at the port. He was the port's lead staff on the Port of Los Angeles Shore to Store project, which deployed 10 hydrogen fuel duty trucks and 2 new heavy duty fuel stations in the port region. There's a lot of heavy and hydrogen going on here. Throughout the presentation, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them following the presentation itself. Please use the Q&A box only for questions rather than the chat box. It just helps us keep everything in one place. If you like someone else's questions that you see, please feel free to upvote it, and this will help us determine the order of the questions being addressed. Now, over to you, Jacob, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. So let me share my screen here. So yeah, thank you everyone. As just introduced, my name is Jacob Goldberg. I'm a manager of our Technology Advancement Program at the Port of Los Angeles, and was lead staff on the Shore to Store demonstration project that we're going to get into a bit momentarily. So just a little bit of background on the Port of Los Angeles and kind of how we came to be playing a role here. So this is an aerial photo of the Port of Los Angeles complex right next to our neighbors at the Port of Long Beach. From an aerial photo, it certainly appears to be one major port. It's technically 2 separate port entities, but taken together as one, again, complex. This is either the 9th or 10th largest port complex in the world by cargo volume, depending on how you count it and what year data you're looking at. Each port is technically a department of the local city, either of Los Angeles or Long Beach respectively, and we do not operate the cargo moving equipment directly. Rather, we lease the property to private companies that actually perform the goods movement through our facilities. So the major ships coming in, the actual on-dock terminal equipment, and the trucking companies that perform this goods movement work are, again, private entities contracted independently from us. We play the role of, again, landlord and kind of facilitator, as well as government oversight. We are not a regulatory agency. We don't have direct authority to pass laws requirements from that perspective. Rather, we come at it from a collaborative approach and as a landlord with lease requirements and things like that, but there's limited authority to require direct actions. Founded in 1907 under a grant from the California state to the city of Los Angeles, under the condition that all Funds raised by the city in operating the port must be spent at the port to facilitate trade through our gateway. 7,500 acres of port property across both land and water, 53-foot main channel depth, allowing the largest ships in the world to come call at us as necessary, across a variety of different business angles and cargo coming through, which I'll talk to on a slide in a second, with 7 major container terminals, which is kind of where we're going to focus in on and get into the trucking world of what we're talking about. Also have a robust network of on-dock rail, one of the best built out rail infrastructures from a port complex's perspective, allowing cargo to come into our gateway, get on a train, and get out into the rest of the United States as necessary. One of the largest economic engines of Southern California and of the greater United States as a whole. There's roughly 15,000 longshore and on-terminal work jobs associated with our facility, handling almost 500 billion in value on an annual basis throughout the United States, touching every U.S. congressional district and several other countries as well. Yeah, so just some, again, basic business background. We don't only handle container traffic, but it is one of the largest systems. It's just statistics from the last year, all the various different things that kind of encompass the Port of Los Angeles and what we do. So all of that has built to a large local impacts from an air quality perspective, emissions that have associated and been harmful to our local neighbors. We're surrounded by residential neighborhoods, and as well as the growing focus on climate change and greenhouse gas impacts has fostered the development of this Clean Air Action Plan. It's an overarching strategy adopted by both us and the Port of Long Beach together, focusing on how can we reduce those impacts while maintaining the economic throughput that we just went over. Initially published in 2006, most recently updated in 2017. The CAP looks at goods movement through our facility through 5 different source categories, introducing strategies and initiatives targeting each one and providing the best practices we can to ultimately eliminate local pollution as well as climate change inducing pollutants from our facilities operations. Those 5 categories are the major ships, ocean-going vessels, heavy-duty vehicles, meaning the on-road trucks, cargo handling equipment, on-dock facility enablers such as cranes and major forklifts and things like that, in-water harbor craft that have a home domicile at our facility, tugboats, personal vehicles, things like that, and locomotives, as mentioned, alongside the side of discussion about our rail infrastructure, moving cargo on and off the docks. About 25% of cargo that comes into our facility leaves via on-dock rail, which is part of the roughly 35% of all containerized cargo that comes into the United States entering through our gateway. Under the Clean Air Action Plan, there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm not going to get into today. I'm always happy to talk about anybody that has more questions. We have an annual emissions inventory. That is our way of tracking progress. Since 2005, we put together a robust data set on kind of everything that comes in and all the associated emissions, both local and climate change inducing. And a key element is our technology advancement program in furtherance of the major zero emissions goals. In the Clean Air Action Plan as updated in 2017, our goal is to achieve a 100% zero emission cargo handling equipment fleet on dock by 2030, and relevant to the discussion today, our on-road fleet of heavy-duty equipment, drayage trucks as we call them, to be 100% zero emissions by 2035. In furtherance of achieving that goal, we recognize the need to advance the technology, and we're going to get into those discussions and kind of how we got to our project in just a second. This is a snapshot of what the drayage market is in Southern California and what the truck fleet looks like. Just about 21,500 trucks registered as of June 2023. 13,500 or so of those are making most of our moves and are active at least on a weekly basis. And most of those are to the cleanest US EPA Environmental Protection Agency standard, 98%. That's a California state law. Those last 2% have a little bit of an exemption and are going over this next year and should be transitioned out over by the end of this year. In the advanced technology world and extremely reduced pollution side of things, we've got around 873 natural gas trucks, some old from late 2000s into the early 2010s. About 500 of those are much more recent, with the ultra low NOx engines from Cummins. And then there's just under 120, 119 there, zero emission trucks registered in our service as of today. That number has been erratically growing over the last couple of years as new demonstrations continue to refine the models of zero emission options, both in the battery electric world and as we're about to discuss, the hydrogen fuel cell. So our goals in technology advancement and the role we play, we are trying to encourage the development and innovation in the technological world, demonstrate their effectiveness into our real world operational duty cycles, which I'll touch on in just a second, accelerate the commercial availability, and eventually meet the goals under the Clean Air Action Plan. We play a number of different roles, either directly funding things ourselves under, again, that technology advancement program, or securing funding from other government agencies, be they state in the California state government or federal government grants from the U.S. Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Transportation, and others to bring projects into our region to attempt to develop the zero emissions models that we need to achieve our goals. We've done a lot over the years. I'm not going to get into these in specific detail except for the zero emission trucks. But from gantry cranes to locomotives, over to in the water stuff with our tug vessels or ship efficiency projects, ship engine emissions reduction technologies, all kinds of things since the 2008 inception of our technology advancement program. More information on that is available on our website. And anyone interested in doing work at the Port of Los Angeles and demonstrating an emissions reduction technology or a new model or something like that is encouraged to take a look at our webpage on the link here. There's an annual application, or sorry, not annual, rolling application process for anyone interested in demonstrating technology at our facility. More information is there, as well as reports on all of our past projects, all available on that website, and the annual report that covers our ongoing projects as well. So focusing in on the demonstration that is the topic today. Since that 2008 section of the Technology Advancement Program, the ports have been looking at a wide variety of technologies with the goal of, again, achieving the zero emissions goals of the Clean Air Action Plan. We present ourselves as fuel agnostic, meaning that we don't have a preference for fuel technology or mechanism by which the equipment achieves zero emissions at its tailpipe, just that it is a zero emissions vehicle at the end of the day. However, in the projects that we've done in the past, we were beginning to see a plateau in the capabilities of battery electric truck technologies with respect to a few key factors that our operators that perform the drayage work at our facilities were continuing to bring up as a potential challenge and a point of concern for them in the possibility of adopting these into their full fleet and regular operations on this. Primarily, anxiety over the range of operation, time to refuel, and infrastructure needs at their home domiciles were the major concerns continuously being brought up. And then, of course, the overall weight of the cab vehicle itself in comparison to the cargo load it can pull. Here in California, our roads are limited to 82,000 pounds for the entire vehicle. Generally speaking, there's a few overweight corridors, but overall, that's your general requirement. And the heavier your cab truck itself, the less load you can take on the cargo side, which is a major limiting factor when most of our containers coming out of our facility are indeed full weight, and you'll need as light a truck as possible. Battery electric technology can do further range if you pile more batteries on, but you're trading that off with cargo capacity. And our drayage operators have expressed keen concern over that being a viable pathway for most of our operators. Not all, several are definitely capable of doing the type of work that they typically do under the models that we were seeing. But the promises of the hydrogen fuel cell technology is essentially addressing these specific concerns. Being able to have tanks that are comparable or at least only slightly penalty in comparison to diesel weight that can take you over 400 miles before you need to refuel. Refueling time at the heavy duty stations in 15 to 20 minute ranges. Infrastructure being efficient at a public scale, putting a fueling station as more or less the same footprint as a diesel station today, and being able to pull trucks through in the same way that currently diesels do in our area here in Southern California, in comparison to battery electric chargers, taking quite a bit more infrastructure investment and time at the charger, as well as facility layouts being a lot more complicated to be able to pull up to and pull away from chargers. So all of this raised our interest specifically in fostering the development of hydrogen fuel cell trucks to see if they can pull off the duty cycle needed for the port complex, particularly as regional infrastructure investments need to be undertaken to be able to achieve our overall goal. In 2018, the California Air Resources Board, which is the state government agency responsible for air emissions in California, issued a grant program called the Zero and Near Zero Emission Freight Facilities Grant Program, or ZANZF. I didn't come up with that one, so don't blame me. Offering up to $50 million per award for demonstrations of any, basically, emissions reductions technology demonstration at freight facilities, or focusing or connecting freight facilities. It was a very broad program. And we went to our partners in the industry that had been looking to demonstrate anything and tried to develop a project program to respond to this particular opportunity. And that's where this one came together with our partners, to get into in just a second. In the end, our team received an award of roughly $41 million, which was coupled with $42 million in private investment and our Port of Los Angeles funding as well, for a total project value of roughly $83 million. To kind of build out the hydrogen infrastructure network and demonstrate our hydrogen trucks. So, of those hydrogen trucks, 10 fuel cell Class 8 heavy-duty trucks were developed by Kenworth Truck Company in partnership with Toyota. Toyota was the progenitor behind the fuel cell stack itself and worked very closely with Kenworth in project integration to develop the overall truck based off Kenworth's T680E electric model. The project kicked off in April of 2019. First truck was deployed in August of 2021, and there was a total of 1 year demonstration across the fleet, ending in August of 2022. On the fueling station side, this project directly funded 2 heavy-duty stations, one near the port in Wilmington, California, just off port property, right by the kind of various facilities that the trucks drive through or in and around, and then one in Ontario, California, which is a warehouse district kind of town near a freight airport, about 70 miles north and east into the greater Inland Empire area of Southern California, which is a major warehouse district, like I said, and kind of first point of drop off for either cargo coming from our port going into the United States or coming from other states going towards our port. So it's a kind of the end point of our major nexus and a good kind of first point of building out that fueling station network that we would need to see. Our demonstration partners, we have 4 fleets participating under this. UPS, which is the logo you see in the center of the screen there, took 3 of these trucks for regional services from in and around Ontario and throughout our port complex. Toyota's logistics service took 4 trucks, which is their parts movement and car movement kind of deployment arm of Toyota. And the 3 other trucks were handled by 2 different, very local fleets handling cargo in and out of the port of Los Angeles. This is a map of Southern California and the locations of our stations. The 3rd station there, that's the one labeled with Pier B, Long Beach, was separately funded by Shell and brought as part of this project to showcase, again, that developing network of hydrogen refueling stations. So there's the 2 down at the port complex and then 1 out in the Ontario area. These 3 hydrogen stations are still the only heavy-duty publicly accessible stations, although they're on an appointment system, so you can't just pull up right now. But their redundant system is accessible, and given that there's only 3 active hydrogen trucks in our system following the completion of this project, the system is certainly ready to take more as they start being deployed. So this here is one more map of the baseline drayage operations from our participating fleets. So we put data loggers on several of their regular diesel trucks as they were continuing to do their operations, and a few natural gas trucks operated by one of our port drayage operators. And you can see that there's most of the operations is in that call out box, which is basically the same map I just showed of Southern California with the big heat map around the port complex itself, of course. But we do have a lot further ranging trucks that do come up, and that's where the range question comes into play. While you would think that port operations for heavy duty trucking would usually just be near port, move from port terminal to local warehouse and back. We often have drop-offs that go quite a bit further, and that's why our drayage operators are really keen on the range of these trucks. Sometimes 80 miles all the way out to Phoenix or Las Vegas, which would be 300 miles or so away, up into the Central Valley and Sacramento area of California, 400 something miles away. So the range factor is definitely of interest. Our trucks under this program were not being tested at that range. For one thing, there's no fueling site for them out anywhere near there. They'd have to bring their own fuel to get back. But for another, we were really looking at the resiliency of operation in local service. Can they kind of keep up with the more local systems? And then later models and iterations will be looking at the real long range as the fueling gets into place. So how things go. Roughly 22,000 miles of in-service operations were accumulated across the fleet. The average there, well, 10, so it's 2,200 miles per truck. That is a little bit of a misleading, given that the trucks accumulated roughly 40,000 miles of pre-service testing at Kenworth Truck Facility. There was a lot of iteration over those 2 years between project kickoff and first deployed truck. Learning and going. Kenworth's validation system requires 40 hours of continuous testing on their test track in Washington State with North California before being deployed without any fault. So you need 40 hours continuous operation before, and we would get to 36, 37 on a truck, and then something will pop up. Even if it's just an engine light, that resets the clock. Overall, upon deployment, driver feedback was really positive. Like the power of the truck, like the flexibility of the truck. The refueling times, which we'll get into in a second, were a little longer than expected, but significantly less than anyone had experienced on the battery electric side. Fuel efficiency was reasonably, slightly better, 6.7 miles per diesel gallon equivalent. The power trait, transition between kilogram of hydrogen and a gallon of diesel is about 0.9. So you get a little bit more power per a kilogram of hydrogen, but when you average out those calculations, you're getting a little bit more fuel efficient overall. And again, overall comfort was really high. Everyone really liked the overall performance of the truck once it got into service. A lot of lessons, like I said, learned on the test track and in development and in continued maintenance as the project went on. Software updates coming through that would cause a lot of issues. In the original side, the supply of the hydrogen tanks was harder to get than expected. There was an issue with one particular version of sealant they were using that was causing intrusion in the high humidity zone in the testing area in Brenton, Washington. That they had to switch out to a different one. So again, a lot of lessons learned within the hydrogen system in the development. But overall, once the truck was deployed, very strong feedback in overall operations. On the station side, the stations were designed and capable of commencing just under 1,200 kilograms per day. We're nowhere near stress testing that. Each truck had a capacity of 60 kilograms, and there was no particular day where they all tried to fuel at once. We did a back-to-back fuel of 5 trucks at one time where the station performed well, but they didn't need to fill fully, so we weren't stress testing the overall throughput capacity yet. Each station has 2 fueling islands, one at 350 bar, one at 700 bar. These trucks take their hydrogen at 700, but we understand there's a lot of testing in the area on lower pressure hydrogen systems for heavy duty vehicles, particularly on terminal equipment, things like that. So Shell elected to have both options at each station as we're still learning and developing that network. Refueling rate was about 1.5 kilogram per minute, which is a lot slower than the kind of modern stuff that had been coming out. It was a little bit slower than we had hoped from our initial pitch back in 2018. But overall improving over time, as well as, again, providing a lot of feedback to Shell and the station designers to be able to take it into the next generation. There's a lot, again, of challenges related to compressor modules coming up and down. So the on-station storage site is stored a little bit not as compressed as the suspension is 700 bar. They recompress and then issue into the truck. And at any given time, there's 2 compressor modules at each station. At any given time over the course of our demonstration, one would be down for some type of maintenance or improvement, while the other one would be operating to keep the trucks going. A lot of software updates, and then having communication issues between the truck and the station, which is where you see On the graph there's a lot of basically 0 to 1 kilogram fuels in our data, because of faults in the communication system or false start fueling system. So when we analyze for actual fuel rate, we moved those out of the averages. But again, this just kind of goes back to the need for these types of demonstrations and deployments to learn and grow and move the ecosystem into the next step. So a lot of false start fill events that were happening, particularly early on in demonstration. They trailed off as the demonstration went on, as drivers got used to it and as the stations themselves got it. An overall final report was submitted to the State Air Resources Board and is available for download and review at the link that you see on the screen there. Again, overall, the trucks performed well. The average fuel economy in comparison to diesel trucks a little bit better, but within the same range. Driver feedback continued to be positive. Following this project, Toyota and Kenworth continued their partnership and have announced sales of a commercial model for initial deployments in late 2024 and a full commercial production in 2025. You can contact them now if you're interested in the truck itself. The fueling stations remain open and for service here in Southern California. Costs at the pump right now are a lot higher than they were during the project. Hydrogen is a bit pricey here in Southern California, running almost $30 a kilogram, which is not comparable to the $5.50 or so per diesel gallon. But there's a lot of projects underway to try to alleviate the supply issues of hydrogen in our facility. Again, lessons learned all over the place in respect to specific component failure points, software refinements needed, the module design. Shell is currently under construction of another station in the greater area, actually kind of between the port complex and Ontario from that map earlier, that iterates on this station design that's about 4 times the capacity on the same footprint with all the lessons learned from this particular project. That station is scheduled to open in 2025. So kind of looking forward and where we're trying to move needles ourselves is looking at demonstrations both for the on-road trucks and into our port complex on like heavy-duty forklifts, top handlers, off-road trucks, that kind of thing. There's the opportunity of our duty cycle continues to showcase hydrogen technology is important, and our capability to facilitate these types of demonstrations continues to be an opening factor for the development of hydrogen fuel cell technology in heavy-duty operations. The hydrogen supply question is a huge issue, both in the type of production, where it's coming from, how it's brought to our facility and how it's used, and the overall economic price of said hydrogen is extremely important, and we need to find ways to build out the resiliency of the supply network. And then, of course, the overall cost themselves. You're looking at an $83 million total project for 3 hydrogen filling stations and 10 trucks. That is not a feasible ratio for actual business operations. And the price of truck at a little over $1 million in the R&D stage per truck is not remotely the intended sale point for these trucks. But the overall system needs to have the redundancy and market productions to bring those prices down into the reasonable world. So that's a quick run through. Happy to kind of talk on it. And like I said, that final report, I'll bring that link back up real quick. And these slides I understand will be posted, is much more detailed and walks through all the data points we received and specific feedback, and more than happy to follow up from there. So, but yeah, other than that, that's my presentation. I'm looking forward to questions.
That's great, Jacob. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do have questions, to please put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. And I see we have one there already. But before we get to that, Jacob, I wouldn't mind just kind of asking you, I have more general questions than maybe some of the technical people on the line today. But when you're taking a look at what the Port of Los Angeles has done through this project and the success of that, how do you see the results of this maybe being replicated across other ports in North America? And is this something that's being looked at?
Definitely. We've seen a lot of attention from this particular project and a lot of people calling with interest in understanding what we did, how it went, and what the next steps are, particularly in light of the announcement from Kenworth and Toyota of the commercial model line. So those trucks are available for sale, and we'll, again, see introduction in late 24, early 2025. The limiting factor continues to be the fueling station side. So we have a lot more questions on the infrastructure side and what it takes to put these things in the ground. Local permitting issues are always a challenge. It took a year and a half to get through overall approvals before we even broke ground on the first station. So there's a lot of getting into the technical discussions at ports around the country and sharing information with ports around the world. There was a hydrogen work group led by the Port of Valencia just a couple months ago that I was presenting on and discussing with their group on what we did and how it goes. So definitely a lot of keen interest. It's certainly a replicable model. The price itself is very high, so it's definitely looking for funding at this point and finding the partners that want to take that first plunge, because it is still a trial. The trucks that will be coming will be a lot more refined, but there's still going to be hiccups in the road. And again, the station side itself has a lot of ups and downs and software learning and things like that. And your local permit reviewers and such like that, it may be the first time they've seen a hydrogen station, and that's always a concern for an inspector. So we're always happy to share that information and have been asked to do so in the past and look forward to doing so again as more questions come in.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Let's take a few of the questions that we have from the participants today, and I'm just going to go, I guess, by order here. We do have one with regards to hydrogen internal combustion engines versus the hydrogen fuel cell powertrain. So, where do you see the benefits of you were saying with the hydrogen fuel cells over maybe the internal combustion engines, and is the port going to be looking at both technologies?
Yeah, so there's very slight trade-offs in the emissions profile perspective when the local combustion, there are some local pollutants associated with it. So we're watching that carefully with respect to our community and how they feel about us taking on these types of trials. That said, the trade-offs are the fuel cell equipment itself is going to be more expensive versus an internal combustion hydrogen technology. The replicability of parts, the software up and down bits, you'll have a lot less of those issues when you're looking at an internal combustion version of a hydrogen, since a lot of those parts are replicable across the diesel systems. The fuel cell is the ultimate goal with respect to, again, a zero emissions future, a truly sustainable operations. So when we had the opportunity to take the step in that direction, we took it with, again, the ultimate goal in mind. We're certainly open to the concepts of exploring both sides of things as it makes the most sense. Again, the heavy duty lifts, for example, some of our equipment, we call them top handlers. They're built, giant reverse forklifts designed to pick up containers from the top and lift onto the stack, so you can kind of see over the corner of my shoulder there. When you're looking at those things in the duty cycle of that kind of lift and down and the intensity, you might start looking back at combustion engines for a while of hydrogen, because they are so much cleaner at the site of the burn than diesel is. So there's definitely opportunities there. And when we start talking about the ships over my shoulder, combustion is going to be the way to go for quite some time. So we're definitely exploring all of those opportunities. We're hopeful in the on-road side of the world and possibly a lot of our cargo handling fleet, we can get to the fuel cells right away. We don't have to go through the combustion step, but each will be complementary. And I know long-winded answer, but the hydrogen economy and like discussing the price of hydrogen as a fuel is a major limiting factor right now. And the more equipment we can get operating on it, the more redundant that system gets, the better the whole system will move forward. So we're definitely keen on seeing what makes the most sense for each given operation cycle and exploring that technology.
And just speaking on the price, it just leads us into the next question that one of our participants posted with regards to what was the price of the hydrogen when you first started kicking off the project, and then how did it kind of progress from there? You said $30 hydrogen. That's a pretty high price tag when you look at it compared to other fuels. So are you able to even break down that cost further as far as what did that include?
Yeah, so the initial price, kind of as we were starting and as we kind of held it through the demonstration of the process, was right around $15 a kilogram. That had to do with the local supply at the time, the stability of that expectations, and the contract Shell had with the actual hydrogen provider, Air Products, and then how to pass that through at a way that no one's losing money, but no one's making money, because it was the purpose of this kind of demonstration to everyone being a partner together. coming out of that, coming out of the COVID challenges and the shakeup to the infrastructure systems here in Southern California, we saw a steady rise in the price of hydrogen to the point where over the last few months, it's been hitting that $30 a kilogram mark. A lot of that has to do with supply lines. There isn't a great amount of hydrogen production in local to Southern California. It's mostly produced either for a specific purpose here or elsewhere and then brought into our facility. And the price is mostly tied to the transportation of the hydrogen. Production itself is very cheap. Dispensing is very cheap, but moving the hydrogen to our facility is quite a bit. There's only a couple of hydrogen pipelines in the area today, and they're fully used to capacity by our local refining companies. And so there's no, for vehicle grade hydrogen, what's coming out to these dispensers is a very unique case, and there's just not a lot of demand right now. Again, we're at 3 operating trucks, down from 13 when we had these 10 trucks in operations. And there's a handful of passenger vehicles in the area, but not a tremendous amount. So until the demand side picks up and you see more production rising to balance it, we're in a little bit of a tough spot right now. Looking into the future, there's a number of major initiatives in California as a whole and Southern California specifically to produce hydrogen through renewable pathways, usually renewable natural gas, biogas production, that kind of thing, turning it into hydrogen for vehicle use, like dedicated towards transportation, coming online late 2025, early 2026, that time frame. So there is a horizon where we kind of see a price drop. But it's going to be a bit there, and it's all going to depend on what the use case is and who's actually making it for our local market.
And so just to go back, so when you were looking at the supply of the hydrogen delivered to the station, what was that cost again?
So during the demonstration, it was a ballpark $15 a kilogram.
Yeah. Okay.
That was being artificially held there.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Sounds good. And then just on that supply, there's a question here with regards to the source of the supply and whether it was, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, all those lovely colors that we have now. So if you could just talk a little bit about where the source of that was, and also the second part of the question was, has anybody been working on the socioeconomic environmental impacts, taking into account health and air quality?
Assuming that refers to the production of hydrogen, but yes.
Yeah.
So in the context of this project, there was a requirement in the contract that 33% of the hydrogen at minimum be from a renewable source. This was done. 100% of our hydrogen was through dairy biogas production in Central California. So it was all somewhere in the kind of blue range of what hydrogen usually looks at. There wasn't carbon capture specifically, but the gas itself was renewable, so you had a negative carbon intensity. The exact calculation is in our final report. I don't remember it offhand, unfortunately. But so that was specific to our project. With respect to the socioeconomic analyses, quite a lot here in California is actually being invested into that analysis. Looking forward, the U.S. Department of Energy has a major grant program out that they're working on right now for regional clean hydrogen hubs, to reference the terminology. And California is working, to address that directly. And a major kind of community outreach, socioeconomic analysis of production of hydrogen in California, what does it take to do that correctly, is underway. The overall presentation of what California wants to do there is maintain a negative carbon intensity overall and minimize to eliminate local impacts from that production, particularly from a water supply perspective as well. Here in California, we have some drought issues. So trying to minimize all those types of impacts. It's challenging. It's a balancing act up the supply chain stream. So we at the port don't have a direct nexus to it. But we keep our eye on it overall and are definitely participating in those studies as they continue forward.
And I guess just on that, there was a question here on the different technologies that were considered. And the question is, has the port reviewed methane pyrolysis as a method to produce hydrogen with lower energy intensity versus electrolysis combined with no required water for the conversion? This might be an option to lower the cost.
For sure. And we know of at least one major methane pyrolysis project in Central California that is underway. I believe it's going to be online in mid-2025, producing, I don't want to quote a wrong number there. We the port try to stay, again, like I said, one step removed from the decision point on that factor. It's not really our jurisdiction to play in, and if it's not happening at our facility locally, we don't have any control over it. We strongly encourage the cleanest possible method that economically makes sense. We've looked at methane pyrolysis kind of from an overall perspective so that we understand it. It certainly seems like a reasonable pathway forward. I don't have the direct information on local impacts and what that looks like. It's again subject to the local review, but we're open to more or less any production pathway that is moving towards the truly sustainable goal. Our ultimate, preference and goal is truly sustainable. Our community demands green, electrolytic, fully sustainably produced hydrogen is like the end goal of where we need to go. But economically, that's going to be a long time down the road before that all makes sense at a structural level. May never, like, there's a lot of trade-offs within that. So we look to the hydrogen industry and local permitting authorities to find the best path forward. And yeah, certainly methane pyrolysis is an option.
Do you see the future of the port being totally converted to hydrogen for all operations in the future? Or, I mean, that's a big step, but you're looking at trucks right now, but I mean, what's kind of the next step, do you think is the opportunity at the port?
Yeah, so we're looking across all of those 5 source categories. So we look at, again, ships, trucks, cargo handling equipment, locomotives, and harbor craft. And hydrogen has the potential to impact each of those. I don't know if we'd ever see a 100% hydrogen powered port complex. There's enough of the duty cycles for some of that off-road equipment and some of the harbor craft and things that just make sense for the battery models that are basically almost available today, if not available today, that they'll probably buy those and work just fine. So I don't know if we'll ever see 100% hydrogen. But within those source categories, hydrogen does present the best use case, or at least projects to present the best use case for many, if not all, of these systems. We are looking at testing, and we've done some testing on cargo handling equipment, different types. Again, top handlers in particular. There's a one demonstration of a top handler that's been going very well at one of our terminals. That's running on a hydrogen fuel cell system. We had 2 yard tractors, as they're called, basically on-road trucks, but limited to off-road operations, that demonstrated a different one of our terminals last year, and more coming in the future. Our hopeful participation in California's hydrogen hub involves cargo handling equipment and a variety of different types being tested at each terminal. We know of a project designing a hydrogen-powered tugboat. And one of our biggest initiatives today is what we call our Green Shipping Corridors initiative, where we're working with different ports around the world to target specific reduction of emissions along the routes between our ports. And hydrogen as a base molecule, either hydrogen itself, ammonia, e-methanol, things like that, are all being discussed for reducing emissions from the ocean-going vessels. So kind of hydrogen is likely to impact everything. When I think about the port of 2050, that's hopefully a zero emissions port at that point. Hydrogen plays a very prominent role. I wouldn't say 100%, but definitely we see it affecting almost everything.
That's great. And just speaking on the infrastructure side, you were talking about the challenge with fueling stations and getting those in the ground. What was the deciding factor on where to build these fueling stations when it really came down to, the whole infrastructure plan going forward?
Yeah, so there was a couple different decision points for the 3 stations that were involved in this project. Again, 2 were directly funded by the overall program. The third had a separate grant, but was brought together in part of it. So kind of taking each one by turn, the Port of Long Beach facility that had the separate grant is right on Toyota's property there, where they have a terminal that's bringing in Toyota cars in their facility. They are importing Toyota Mirais, which is the light-duty hydrogen car. So they needed hydrogen on site anyway. Once that decision point was made, and they were also looking into the heavy duty side, it made a lot of sense to incorporate a heavy duty station as well on that same property, since it was already being permitted for hydrogen fueling. It was already getting all those same approvals. It was not much of a major extra step to incorporate hydrogen there. On the Port of LA version side, the Wilmington station right by the Port of LA, that was a Shell-owned property that was not being used. That was in reasonably good access to the highways. So when we were looking for properties that were easy to kind of quickly take control and deploy, that was by far and away the best site in our area that could move relatively quickly to actual deployment. They did still have a few headaches with permitting and approvals, but overall, given that Shell had direct ownership and control of that property, there was a lot less hurdles to get through. So when we were looking for a site to get off the ground, get the project started, get a facility going, that one made the most sense. The third station in Ontario is a active truck stop / truck center out there, Travel Centers of America. It's one of the largest ones in that region, and like I said, it's the kind of that first point of drop off for trucks coming out of our port and coming back from other places in the country. So it really made a lot of sense to try to build some hydrogen fueling lanes in that facility and see what that looked like for the truckers, just pulling in like they normally do, which actually went really well. So that site was selected because of A, Travel Centers of America's willingness to be a part of it, but B, it was the active truck center. It was a normal fueling lane, exactly like what we hope to replicate into the future across the country of what truck stops should look like with a hydrogen fueling lane.
That's great. And you mentioned Shell's participation and you know how important they were in this partnership. And it's interesting, one of the questions here is, you know, do we see traditional players like Shell interested in retrofitting and converting existing infrastructure to hydrogen? And I know here in Alberta, you know, we do have some of the big traditional energy players that are definitely interested in the hydrogen opportunity as a decarbonization play. So we really see that here. How was that experience working with a company like Shell as a partner in this project?
It was a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. We in the slides before, there was a lot of those projects over the years. We've done a lot of work with small startups that have a really cool idea that are building something in their garage and had a lot of challenges there. And then working with Toyota, Kenworth, and Shell is just it's a different caliber of company. It's a different redundancy. It's a different capability of planning long term and working through the kinks when they pop up. There was a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, and each time the Shell project person said, "We identified this issue, and here's the 3 different solutions we've identified for how we're going to address it," which was again just a really nice experience as a project manager to be able to rely on the fact that they've done their homework, they're moving on to the next step, and they're answerable to someone, in their opinion, more important than the Port of LA, their bosses. With respect to the reusing infrastructure specifically that is currently for diesel, it's in their plans as kind of like the long-term pitch, but in the short term, there was a lot of hesitancy to take a currently active station out of service. So they were looking for new sites, looking for old properties they had they weren't using anymore across their portfolio of companies, because there's different buckets of Shell. And we have a marine oil terminal that imports crude and things like that into the Shell system. They had, as it happens, extra property right nearby. They were assessing for a fueling station that wasn't currently being used as they transitioned that part of their system elsewhere, that kind of thing. So that's more like what we were seeing as this project was being started, and we still continue to see at this point, just because companies like Shell, while they're definitely keen on hydrogen as the major push into the future, there's still a lot of hesitancy to make a big investment before there's a demand side. It's a demonstrable demand for it. Shell's taking a loss on these stations right now, and certainly did during the life of the project, because like I said, they capped the price of the hydrogen, because there isn't a demand behind it. There's only 3 trucks. So in long term, definitely. Short term, it's going to be a hard press to say to switch out the diesels for hydrogen. It's certainly possible. Again, the footprint designs and things are trying to get to the point where a hydrogen station can fit on that same property without any real issues. And that's definitely the overall goal, but it'll be a while before you, at least here, before you start seeing Shell stations transition to hydrogen fully.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to get into some of the technical ones, and this is where you're going to see me gloss over as I'm asking the questions. So I'm an economist, I'm not an engineer. So what were some of the challenges that limited hydrogen fill rates to 1.5 kg per minute versus 3.6 HD high flow fills?
Yeah, so a lot of that information is in that final report, so I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that, and feel free to follow up with specific questions, because if I don't know it and it's not in the report, I can find the person that does know it and get it to you. With respect to the rate of fill, it was definitely the compressor modules that they had, and this was one particular supplier that they had them from, and this was an early model of it, by my understanding. So it's not, like you said, this was definitely lower than the anticipated. We were projecting around 3 kilograms per minute was like our target rate, and we got significantly lower than that. And it was mostly because of inefficiencies in that compressor, either getting the pressure back up and then a truck pulling up, it's back-to-back filling, or just having issues and a part being down and taking 3 weeks for a new one to get out, and only one module running rather than 2. You're supposed to have both running at once to get up to the pressure faster and then dispense quickly and effectively. Again, Shell projects that the newer versions of what they've got coming out will be higher than 3.6. I think they're projecting around 5. Though I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head. But yeah, there are a variety of reasons there. Some seal issues. Sometimes it was an operator thing and like how they put them in. Like it case by case basis, there were a lot of issues. And even once we eliminated all the 0 to 1 kilogram fills, there was still a lot of 1 and 3 kilogram fills that took a while, and so there's definitely some noise in our data as well. But those are the kind of the major things we were seeing. And again, if there's a more technical question in there, we can get the answer.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think too, just to remind everybody, I mean, with Jacob's contact information, it will be on the site tomorrow with the presentation. So if you do want to reach out to Jacob, I'm allowing you to just go and fill his inbox, but definitely reach out to Jacob for any additional questions on the work that was done. Another one here, just with regards to the curious how the port is refueling yard equipment. Did you install your own station at the port, or are you using mobile refuelers? And is the port considering its own small scale hydrogen production?
Good questions all. So standard port operations is wet fuels. So we've got a diesel truck that rolls around to each of our terminals. Well, individual terminals have their own diesel trucks. Say we don't have anything. And those diesel trucks will go to the equipment corral where most of the equipment gets parked and fill everything up there, and then go to particularly the rubber tired gantry cranes, our big cranes that are not grid electric. Those ones, you don't roll them to a parking place, you bring the fuel to them. So that's what's currently being done with diesel. For our hydrogen tests to date, we've had a hydrogen skid on station, so it's semi-mobile in that you bring it to the site and then you put crash protection up and permit the site specifically for fueling. That's what we've done to date. Our angle to the future is mobile refueling. We're really looking for a system that can be permitted to go roll and fuel anywhere on the terminal property that we can. That's the model that our current operators use. That's the model that the Longshore Labor Union that works the terminals understands and has classifications that do the driving of that truck, do the fueling off that truck, and do the driving of it. Like all that is the same system. And strongly, everyone across the system prefers maintaining that exact structure. So rather than building a fueling station and trying to make everything work, if we can get everything to work off a mobile fueler, our terminals will get a lot more interested in just turning the whole thing over to hydrogen. So when we're looking at our next stage of demonstrations at port equipment, we're really keen on mobile, truly mobile refueling operation options going that direction. The last question there was for production on site. The port, us ourselves, are not looking to be in the business of making hydrogen and selling hydrogen. We don't want to touch that, but we're certainly encouraging our terminals to examine whether that makes sense for them specifically locally. Real estate on terminal is really a premium. You need that land for organizing your equipment, for maintenance sheds, and then getting cargo going. Like that's so the open floor space is really important, and you don't really want to lose that. So the economic trade-off of producing hydrogen locally at the cost of cargo capacity is something that the terminals all need to examine to understand whether that makes sense for them, or if it's going to make more sense to purchase from the market and encourage everyone to produce locally or at scale locally at least. That's the decision points that we're really focusing in on from our kind of economic studies of the hydrogen future trajectory, is what regional production is needed, what local, if any, production is needed, and how does that distribution network work to make the cost of hydrogen not be $30 a kilogram for our terminals. And certainly production, at least at small scale on terminal, is an option. It's just going to depend on what makes sense for them individually.
Obviously price is a big consideration when you do that comparison between hydrogen and diesel. What about with fuel efficiencies? What do you think could be happening there with regards to improving fuel efficiency of hydrogen and diesel?
I mean, that's gonna go into the engine itself and the fuel cell stack, or again, the combustion engine kind of refinements within there that I leave to the equipment manufacturers and the experts within those worlds. Everyone involved is keen on fuel efficiency. The number one cost for our terminal is fuel. The number one cost for our ship operators is fuel. The number one cost for our trucks is fuel. Like everyone, far and away, the biggest thing everyone's paying for at current diesel prices is diesel. So efficiency in and of itself is a major improvement, and we're always looking for ways to do that and find better angles either within the engine itself or outside of that, in improving terminal operations and better planning as the ship comes in, and organizing containers so that you don't have to move it more than once before it leaves your terminal, that kind of thing. Like, so we're looking at all those efficiency improvements and angles as best we can alongside the development of the equipment itself.
Great. I'm going to give you one last question, just looking at the time here before we close out, but it's a good question. Are all the systems gaseous hydrogen, or is there any interest in actually moving towards a liquid hydrogen supply?
All the stuff we've discussed today, the cargo handling equipment, the on-road trucks is gaseous compressed. Vast majority is actually looking at 700 bar, though there's a handful looking at 350. That's the stuff that we've just been talking about. When we transition our conversation to be looking at our hovercraft fleets, our ships, and the locomotives, liquefied starts playing more and more of a role. As right now, for example, a tugboat that is moving our ships in and out of the harbor there. They typically fuel once a week, and they put a few thousand gallons of diesel in there, and they would much rather just keep doing that the same way they do. Can't do that with batteries, just no chance. And on the hydrogen side, even gaseous, it's not going to be the compression tanks, the size, the volumes don't work out until you start looking at liquid. So when I mentioned the design of a tugboat, that's designed to be liquefied. The fueling side of that is still a little bit to be refined and developed, but as we start moving towards the bigger equipment that needs bigger and bigger tanks and currently uses these bigger and bigger tanks, we definitely are looking at liquefied and how to make that system work. Don't know where it's going to go yet. Haven't had those actually get demonstrated, but it's certainly on the table.
Great, thank you. So everyone, that concludes today's webinar. Thanks so much everyone for attending, and a special thanks for Jacob for joining us today and sharing his insights. As I mentioned, the recording of this webinar is going to be located on the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub website, and it's also going to be on the Hub's YouTube channel as well. And that will be all tomorrow or the day after, in the next 2 days. So the next webinar is going to be taking place in September. Details are going to be announced soon on the topic of that webinar and the date. Again, stay in the loop, sign up on the Edmonton Hub site for our for our newsletter on our mailing list, and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So just want to thank you, Jacob, again for your time and going through the work that you've been doing at the Port of Los Angeles. Really interesting stuff. Definitely a massive contribution to the hydrogen economy that we're seeing in North America and globally. And thank you everyone again for your time, and to the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub for putting this webinar on today. Thank you.